Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Audit Committee. We have apologies from Councillor Owen Thompson, now Member of Parliament. In terms of the order of business, there is, I think, later on this morning a very important external meeting on health and social care integration, and that means we are having to reorder the running for today. What I would like to propose is we have item 9 first of all, which is health and social care integration, which allows Evelyn McHugh to get to the important meeting, and thereafter take Gary Fairley's items numbers 11 to 15 as much as we can. If he has to leave, then Gary Thompson will cover on those items, and then we can revert to the normal schedule, reverting to the minutes at that point, and then come on to the procurement, which Ian Johnson is going to talk to in the order it's in. Are we all totally confused? Good. Accordingly, could we look at item 9, health and social care integration, which you'll find on page 65. Could I ask Graham Herbert to lead on this?
Thank you. The Scottish Government has published guidance on the financial assurance process in relation to health and social care integration. One of the recommendations in this paper relates to the role of the Audit Committee and internal audit in the process. This includes, where possible, during the shadow period, looking at the governance, risks and assurance process, as well as the financial provisions to be delegated. It also recommends that internal audit produce a report on the assurance work carried out. At this stage, much of the detailed financial assurance work is still under development, and therefore this review concentrated on the following areas: governance, project management, risk management and budgeting. The main conclusion from the report is that good progress has been made with all the above areas. A small number of issues have been raised in the report and agreed with management over improvements to reporting on risks and project progress. The Audit Committee is therefore asked to endorse the recommendations made in the report, to note that further work will be undertaken by internal audit as the assurance progress develops, and to note that the NHS internal audit team is also undertaking a review for the NHS Audit Committee, which it is hoped will be shared with the Midlothian Audit Committee in due course. Thank you very much.
Questions on the paper?
Can I ask, given we're talking about the NHS internal audit team working as well, is there scope for working together on this rather than have two totally separate audits? Is there any mileage in that?
A question on integration?
Yes, I think that will certainly be the case, and in fact I guess we really tried to do that from the start, but there seemed to be a little bit of a push for us to do it separately this time. But I think as the process continues, we will certainly work jointly with the NHS audit team.
I mean, the broad issue here is the typical joint venture problem that one party may end up giving a lot of input and getting the less benefit than the other. So I guess the vital thing is key performance indicators that show that on a holistic basis the citizen receives better treatment at less cost for the state in general. But in all of this we have to make sure there's not a black hole for Midlothian and its social services. Evelyn.
Yes, there's two areas of work that relate to your comments. One is the work that's ongoing at the moment in relation to the development of the performance plan for the IJB, and that will be related to the national outcomes as laid down in the legislation, where the IJB will be required to demonstrate the impact that it's made. And as I said, that work is being progressed at the moment. But the other area is in relation to the financial assurance, and again there's considerable work going on at the moment around due diligence, and that due diligence is the key objective is that the IJB needs to be assured that it has the resources to meet its requirements in terms of the delivery of services and being in a position to be able to make a difference in terms of outcomes. But there's considerable work going on at the moment in relation to due diligence, and that involves looking back over spend over a number of years, looking at the pressures, but also what's anticipated in terms of projecting forward. And obviously, both organisations are in a situation where resources are diminishing, and it's in that context that work's been undertaken.
Thank you. You're obviously well aware of the tensions and the opportunities in addition. Any further questions? No doubt this subject will return to the Audit Committee at least once, if not several times. Thank you. Could we move now to item 11, financial statements for the year ended 31st March 2015. Could I ask Gary Fairley to comment?
Thanks, Chair. If I could take items 11 through 14 together, and then my colleague Gary Thompson can touch on the item 15, the Treasury Management Report. What you see in front of Audit Committee today are draft reports that will be finalised and will go out with the Council agenda for the meeting on the 23rd of June. So we've taken the opportunity to bring them as drafts to the Audit Committee, so you've got the chance really in terms of your financial governance aspect to see the performance for the year just finished at 31st of March and to consider that. And as I say, I would just reiterate, they are drafts, they will be finished, and the agenda for Council's published I think formally later today. So first of the reports, number 11 sets out the covering report which will go to Council on the financial statements, highlights the requirements around the publication of financial statements, and gives a very headline financial performance in terms of the report. I'll pick up the financial performance as we run through the other reports. Members will be provided with copies of the accounts when they're signed, and we're just now in the final throes of that process in terms of just polishing off the document, which is technical in nature. We'll then proceed to a period of public inspection as required by the regulations, with the aim really of coming back to Audit Committee with the audited accounts after the summer recess, once our colleagues from Grant Thornton have completed the work that's currently ongoing in terms of audit. So happy to pause on the financial statements if there's any questions about that, or if not, I'll move on to the reports we set out, the financial performance.
So moving on to item 12.
Yeah, okay. So item 12 sets out the financial performance for the year on General Fund. First of all, in terms of the year, we've closed the year with an underspend of £4.7 million, 2.47% of revised expenditure. I suppose that in part reflects the ongoing financial discipline which is effective across the organisation. Yes, it is a bigger overspend than we projected at Q3, and we've identified that some of those are one-offs, and work's ongoing really to ascertain how we can continue to improve our financial monitoring so that there are less surprises at the year end. Section 2.1 of the report sets out the movements from last quarter, and then we go on just to provide an update on the movement in reserves through section 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4 sets out the reserve position that we finished the year in. So we end up with a general fund balance of just over £21 million. A significant amount of that is earmarked, and we're sitting with a general reserve, that's the unallocated element of the general fund balance, of £12.8 million. The report also sets out within Appendix 1 the performance on a service-by-service basis as to where the over and underspends have arisen. And then within Appendix 2, members will be familiar with Appendix 2 from the reports that go to Council, sets out for each service the reasons for the material variances, how that's moved over the 4 quarters that we report to Council, and also gives additional information and action being taken. One of the things we are doing now as a team is looking at these variations, how we can then reflect them in future years' financial projections and readjust the projected budgets for future years in light of these variations as to whether they can be harvested from budgets or indeed be otherwise amended. So again, happy to pause there in terms of that report. Reiterate, it is a draft. The final version will go to Council next Tuesday.
Councillor Bryant.
Thank you, Chair. I just got 2 or 3 questions for you, Gary. On page 89, the Snow Sports Centre, will we have a separate balance sheet and report on that?
Certainly, there's no intention to bring forward a separate report on the financial performance of the Snow Sports Centre, but if members wanted further information on any particular item, happy to work with the service managers to bring forward a statement so you can see further details on that.
Thank you. Number 2 is on the page 95, the General Fund overview. The Council Transformation Programme, 901,000. Is that going to go down in the next few months?
And that in terms of, so there's two elements of transformation reported in this report. The amount of money that Council has earmarked for transformation activities from its general fund balance, and that will inevitably be reduced as we utilise that money effectively on a spend to save basis to deliver the changes that are the transformational changes that are needed. And we also report throughout the report on the performance against the various strands of transformation. The main one that's reported this year, I suppose, is the ISS review, where we had a target of £750,000. We've slightly under that, and it really reflects a slower start than we anticipated in the programme. And we report back up through the Business Transformation Steering Group on performance during the year on all of the strands of the transformation programme.
Thanks. And finally, on page 101, in the tables there about New Bars Village, there seems to be a high instance of sickness absence. I just wonder if maybe Evelyn could answer why that is the case.
Yes, we have, and certainly during the year we had very significant concerns around sickness absence at New Bars. Since then, we've completed a piece of work around getting a better understanding of the reasons for sickness absence, and they were varied. Some was to do with the profile of the staff group and in relation to age and their vulnerabilities to sickness. Some of it was around the culture, and finally there was some of it that was around the rigour with which processes around sickness absence was being adhered to. We've taken action on all of those fronts. There's been a significant piece, and we are seeing some improvements, although there's still some way to go in relation to sickness absence. We've seen some improvements, but we're also undertaking further work around the staffing and the structure of the unit. And we're in that piece of work's in process at the moment.
Thanks, Chair.
A couple of general points. One of the only adverse movement we look at is increased cost of weather-related winter maintenance work. Now, I know it's not quite the same thing, but we had actually quite a mild winter this year, and one of the vulnerabilities we have going forward, and perhaps one of the reasons why a slightly higher balance is prudentially required, is that if we do have another hard winter, the impact on reserves can be of the order of 1 to 2 million. Perhaps a John Blair question.
In terms of the first question, although there was less snow than there has been going back a number of years, there was a number of precautionary gritting treatments, hence the overspend in Q4. In terms of provision for bad weather, we've had situations where when the weather is severe, we've had overspends in the region of £2 to £3 million, which is a consequence of the policy to keep Midlothian mobile during times of significant adverse weather.
So it's a factor in maintaining the level of reserves that we now have.
Yeah, weather emergency, the one that occurred in the last 3 or 4 years, but the level of reserves is to cover any other foreseen eventuality, unforeseen eventualities of which weather is the most likely to occur.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points. On page 111, reference here to transformation savings, quite stark, about £900,000 missed in expected savings. And I know the bulk of that is for procurement, and I know we're going to come on to that, I think, on another item in the agenda, but I'm getting distinctly nervous that we're maybe not going to meet some of these targets. Slippage is fine. We have significant reserves, and we can probably manage if we don't make them for a year. And you know, if we slip for a year, that's fine because we've got the reserves to take it. But if in the longer term we don't have the confidence we're going to make these savings, then that worries me significantly. Going back to the winter weather, on page 108, it refers to energy costs. It looks like we're building into the budget, from my reading of this, we're building into the budget lower costs of energy, which are based on, one, the fact that we had a milder winter, and secondly, because energy tariffs are low at the moment, relatively, historically speaking, and current analysis suggests that's not going to happen in the long term, so I'm a bit worried that we might be seeing a sort of temporary drop in the costs of energy. The third point, page 99, the school's devolved budgets. I'm not quite sure I understand why we've got a combination. It says a combination of the use of newly qualified and temporary teachers resulted in a projected underspend. The movement between Q2 and 3 forecasts arose due to an increased average salary. So is that because everyone's salary increased, but I thought we budgeted for that, I think it was a 1% increase, or is it because of the demographics, if you like, within the staff, the age range, experience, etc. So just a bit of explanation on that I'd be grateful for.
Gary?
Yeah, firstly, to come back on energy, we would continually review the budget projections for future years to look at consumption based on the best information available from our colleagues in property services. And yes, although there's short-term reductions in the tariffs, undoubtedly over time they will increase. And again, we'll take market advice in terms of how to pitch your budget to get it as accurate as possible. In terms of the DSM scheme, the way the scheme operates is it allocates resources to schools based on the number of pupils, which drives the number of teachers. We then convert that into what we call an average salary based on our overall teacher population, so that each school is given a resource based on, roughly based on that. And what we've seen is changes in the makeup of the staffing structure during the year, which impacts on that and gives rise to the variation. So we're not fundamentally changing the resources we give to schools. It's on the margins, but small changes can have big swings in terms of that overall teaching budget.
Looking at the 5 million we've spent on voluntary severance, the savings so far are $250,000-ish, which would indicate a slow payback, but that must be just part of the year. So in terms of the severance plan, are we looking to make a fast enough payback?
Yeah, we reported in detail on that to Council late last year. Sorry, my memory can't recollect exactly what Council, but at that point we were looking at expenditure of just under £5 million, and the payback in the first full year was something like £2.5 million. So it was a payback in the region of 2.5 years, there or thereabouts. Certainly significant. The 250 you talk about is only a proportion of the saving. So overall investment of £5 million, average payback of that in terms of the budget implications, 2.5 years.
Recalling Councillor Baxter's point about the transformation programme and the slippage we've had on that, I seem to recall we intended to review the transformation programme more regularly at this committee. I wonder if, Graham, you could comment on when we will next have a more detailed review of what's happening there.
Well, basically, it's in our plan for the current year to review the financial strategy and transformation. And I think it's on our Q2 plan or element of the plan, so it would be, I guess, September, October time. But I know in addition to that, I think basically the financial strategy reports that Gary produces. I think they're to come to this committee as well. Okay.
So we'll see them this year?
Yes, it should be this year.
Gary, do you want to move on to the next paper?
Yep, so the next paper, number 13, sets out the final outcome for the General Services Capital Plan. So in the year, Council has invested just over £11.5 million in your asset base across a range of services, and the appendix sets out the project by project spend for members' information. Funded through a number of strands, government grants, receipts from sales, and of course borrowing, and borrowing continues to be at all-time lows, and we can touch on that as we move to the Treasury Management paper further on the agenda. So again, it's a very good news story in terms of Council, the continued investment in the asset base. If there's no questions on that, I'll turn to number 14, which is the combined housing revenue account report. So the report sets out performance for the year, and it is broadly as previously projected. We see a small underspend on the revenue account of £346,000, and that really flows as a consequence of the capital programme, the spend profile, and also the historically low borrowing position in terms of the way the market is at present. Yes, we have a healthy HRE reserve, which is just over £21 million, but members will recollect on numerous occasions have reminded you that that money is there and is sustaining the investment in the existing stock and also in the continued new build. The new build programme isn't self-financing. It requires the use of reserves to pay the gap between the cost of borrowing to build the houses and the rental income that come from those new houses. And in the year again, in that programme, just shy of £12 million investment, continuing the Council's long tradition of investment in its housing stock. So again, happy to pause there.
Well, this might be a good point to reflect on the accounting adjustments we've had to make because of new buyers. Some of these will be capital write-downs, others will be consequential revenue charges to the housing revenue account. Could you perhaps run over those?
Yeah, the impact on new buyers has impacted on our asset base in terms of the bookkeeping entries. In terms of the impact it has on the housing revenue account, it's really means, I suppose, the level of investment we could have made in terms of phase 2 has been reduced from what it might otherwise have been in terms of the overall number of houses that Council will have on its books. Excuse me.
So we've managed to absorb the dislocation costs and the loss of rents on the revenue account, and on the capital account, as you point out, it simply meant we haven't got so many houses as we might otherwise have.
We've managed to accommodate it, but it does mean that the opportunity to build a further number of houses has been lost.
Councillor De Vink.
Yeah, in relation to this, but also at a previous thing, it's all to do with our capital and our borrowing facilities. If you go back to New Battle, where you, in the previous paper, on the page item 2.5, look at the cap of debt outstanding, which is all relevant to what we've just talked about, we're talking about 114 million of debt. That's about the annual spend that we have in our budget on all other items that are not part of the educational budget. And I'm just so concerned that we are really, in spite of all these comfortable words from the officials, that we are really getting into quite a lot of potential difficulties.
This is a question to the serviceability of the debt going forward, which
That's
we
what I mean.
looked at, I think, about 18 months ago, but you may well want to comment again.
Again, we can cover that perhaps in more detail through the Treasury Management report, but we see the debt servicing cost as a percentage of overall budget within the year fell And I would put the context of that debt in terms of the context of the value of the asset base, which runs into billions of pounds. It's a fact of the capital plan and the investment that the council needs to make in its assets that it needs to borrow money to do that and fund it through the revenue streams over the life of the asset. There's no getting away from that. Not to do that investment, and we've seen it in other areas, capital investment, preventative spend in terms of maintaining the asset base, make sure that they're as energy efficient as they can be, that reduces and avoids unnecessary and costly revenue expenditure as the buildings become not fit for purpose, and it avoids the risk of closure. Council's got a very ambitious capital programme. The Treasury management strategy and the investment strategies that sit alongside that highlight to members the implications of that in terms of the revenue budget and on the Prudential Code. So I would certainly, and that was one of the reasons for placing a cap on borrowing, was to make sure that we sustain the level of investment at an affordable level.
Yeah, but personally, I don't think it is affordable. I mean, you only need to have a small increase, which is very likely to happen, in the LIBOR rate, and other borrowing will cost us that much more, and we're digging ourselves a very substantial hole.
Yes, as I understand it, the Public Works Loan Board is about 3.4%, and most of that will be fixed rate over the period of the instrument. So the element that's vulnerable to LIBOR will only be a portion of our debts. Is that so, Gary?
Yeah, historic borrowing is all principally fixed, and again we perform, and we'll touch on it in the next paper, we perform at one of the best performing councils in Scotland in terms of the average rate we've secured for our borrowing. The challenge the council has is the borrowing requirement based on the capital plans that council has approved will require significant borrowing over the coming years, and obviously there is a market risk attached to that as we can't necessarily predict what the rates will be, but we again take advice and we would enter the market at the appropriate time, and we're looking at other borrowing mechanisms to make sure we secure the very best value for council in terms of our requirement to fund the capital plan. And I would stress it's a capital plan that council has unanimously approved.
I believe that we have moved in the last 5 years from the lowest quartile for borrowing to the upper quartile. There are certainly councils that are more borrowed per capita than we are.
Yeah, the overall movement that you've seen and has been reported through National Audit Scotland reports, for example, does show a growth in Midlothian, and again that reflects the investment council's made in its housing stock. That's been the area where the borrowing has increased the most, and again that has been demonstrated to be affordable through the rent stream that we collect and the reserves that we have within the HRA to fund that. But again, it's all borrowing which reflects the decisions of council to invest in your asset base, whether housing, schools, roads, pavements, whatever it may be.
Councillor Milligan.
Peter, I just want to, Gary, when you answered Peter's question there on the effect of new buyers on the capital investment plan, you seem to indicate that it would have an effect on the amount of houses that we could build. Don't you actually mean a delay in the effect of the amount of houses we can build, because we'd hope we would be pursuing the developers for recompense for that loss of houses? Yeah,
well, I'm looking at where we stand at the moment. All things being equal, if there is no recovery, then there would be it would have a net effect of a less houses. If we can recover some of the costs that the council's incurred in having to demolish and rebuild the houses, then yes, it could be a delay rather than an overall reduction. But clearly that's a position that's still subject to further discussion, and progress needs to be made in terms of any recompense.
We then move on to look at Treasury Management item 15.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of Treasury Management, the purpose of this report is to inform members of the Treasury Management activity undertaken during 2014-15. The main points arising are outlined on the first page of the report and include total new long-term borrowing of £10 million taken in the year, a reduction in the average interest rate payable on the external debt portfolio,
and a decrease in the loans fund rate, which is again expected to be one of the lowest when benchmarked against all mainland authorities in Scotland. The in-year saving in loan charges of £846,000 is reported in the Financial Monitoring Report, item number 12 on today's agenda, and a detailed report on Treasury Management activity is included as Appendix 1. Audit Committee are asked to note the contents of the report, and at this stage I'll pause here to take any questions.
We always consult in our Treasury Management operations, and have we ever had any feedback as to why we have a relatively low cost of capital compared to other Scottish local authorities?
What we've done previously is, in the late 2000s, we restructured our debt. So we took advantage of the low rates on offer from PWLB at that point in time, and that's been factored into the position that we're in at the moment. What we're also doing is actively looking at opportunities as we move forward. So one of the things that we're looking at the moment is forward funding. So looking at booking, what we're doing is looking at booking loans now where the actual drawdown of the loan only occurs in 2, 3 or 4 years' time. So we're taking advantage of the historically low rates that are on offer from PWLB and other sources and locking in at this stage.
That's an interesting shift and a technique that has got many commercial companies into difficulty, but if you take a view that rates can't go any lower, then maybe you do that. We've always pre-funded a little bit where there's a specified capital item on the horizon for the next year or two, so you're indicating we're going to extend that technique to 3 or 4 years.
That's correct. At this point in time, we have an HRA plan that looks forward over a 10-year period. We have a General Services Capital Plan that looks forward over a 3-year period. We'll be in the process of extending the period of the General Services Capital Plan to a 6-year forward-looking period. So the context of our Treasury Management activity is what we're doing now, what we've got historically, and also what we know is coming forward. So we look at that in the overall mix in terms of what we're doing now and what we need to borrow going forward.
Yes, there's probably an element of forward interest options in the package, but you will be taking professional advice on the volatility risk in such a strategy.
Correct. We're in constant contact with our Treasury Management advisors, Capita, and what we're seeing in the market at this point in time is quite significant volatility in rates on a daily basis, but over the quarterly or annual period, they're consistently at a low level of sub 4% for a 30 to 40-year loan, and we've seen rates in the market at that level for the last 2 or 3 years. And in the context of where they've been historically, it's the rates on offer are fantastically low, and what we don't want to do is miss opportunity to invest and capture those rates at this point in time. What we need to bear in mind is the cost of carry if we do take any forward borrowing. So if we're borrowing at 3 or 4%, we can only, and we're not utilising that money to fund capital expenditure now, we can only invest that money at 1% maximum at this point in time. So there's a cost of carry if we do take any loans now that we don't apply to capital expenditure at a later point in time.
Will there be a further paper on the extension of our funding strategy if you head towards a 6-year deal?
Correct. We intend bringing forward a further report to Audit Committee and Council as we move towards the end of the summer. Thanks for the heads up on that. Councillor Bryant.
Just for clarity, I'm not quite grasping this. Are we borrowing the money at 3.46% and then investing it at a lower rate, but just to keep the low rate for borrowing? Is that the case?
That's an option that we've looked at. There's a number of different options out in the market. So that as you correctly say, that is one option. What we do when we're looking at any forward long-term borrowing is we look at a mini business case. So that option, potentially against looking at borrowing now and applying direct capital expenditure, or booking a forward loan where we don't actually draw the money down now, so we don't incur any forward funded costs. So we're booking the loan now, but the money only comes in 2 or 3 years' time. There's obviously a cost attached to that in terms of a premium on the rate, but in terms of what we look at for our options for borrowing going forward, we look at a business case appraisal when we're drawing down each loan in turn.
But we will be able to look at this in greater detail when a paper will come forward in future before anything happens.
Yes.
Thank you for that. Can we return to the beginning of the agenda? I take it there are no declarations of interest. Maybe look now at a minutes of the meeting, item 4, page 3.
Yeah.
Councillor De Vink.
I seem to recall that at the end of the meeting I raised the issue of the lay member, and that's not covered in the minutes. And I would very much like to have an update.
That's because you were out of time at that stage, but maybe that we want to have a comment from the Chief Executive on this issue at some stage of this meeting.
My recollection is that simply that comment was made after the meeting had formally been closed, but I don't know if the John Ward's able to add anything to that.
If I can explain, Chair, there are two aspects to this. One, the comment raised by Councillor De Vink raised after you had formally closed the meeting, and you will find therefore that Councillor De Vink's comments in that respect do not appear in the recording of the meeting. And secondly, no notice prior to the meeting was given of that business. It would therefore not have been competent for the committee to have considered any aspect of that without having formally agreed it in advance.
As I understand, the appointment is in the hands of the Council, not of this committee.
Yes, that's correct.
But I can't believe all this. Could we have at least an update on the situation? Because we are now more than a year ago, the previous member retired, and I think we are derelict in our duties not to have that person replaced, and it would be very nice to have an update.
Well, simply to say that the advertisement has gone out, the closing date is just passed, and this week we'll have be able to identify how many candidates may have put their names forward and the process for interviewing and appointing.
Back to the minutes as they stand. Councillor Bryant.
Just a comment on page 3, item 4B. The issues raised at the Audit Scotland will be addressed during the course of training plan for elected members. Where are we with that?
As I recall the discourse, we intend to wait for the new independent member to be on board and then find a date that is mutually satisfactory to at least a large number of this committee so that we can have a training event. The last one was about 2 years ago. Can I take it we're satisfied now with the minutes? Item 5, school education, pages 9 to 13.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This report sets out the Council's response to the Audit Scotland report on school education published in June 2014. Section 2 outlines the areas examined by Audit Scotland, how much councils spend on education, what it is spent on, how councils are driving forward improvements in pupil achievement, and how efficiently councils are using their resources to maximise pupil achievement. Section 3 outlines key messages from the report, while Section 4 outlines recommendations from the audit, and underneath in italics in each area is Midlothian's response to the recommendations. The committee's recommended to note the Audit Scotland report and the position of Midlothian Council in relation to the report's recommendations. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We note the aggregate spend on education services. Is the per capita spend rising or falling? Are the school rules falling or rising in Midlothian and generally?
The school rolls are rising in Midlothian because we've got a lot of house building going on, so our school rolls are rising. In terms of per capita spend, Grace to my left can advise there. In terms of cost per pupil, obviously this is a historic report, but at that time we were roughly in the middle of the 32 local authorities, so the spend for secondary was 6,523 and for primary 4,762. And obviously our commitment to maintaining teacher numbers and the teacher-pupil ratio, we're currently sitting at 14.2 at the time of the report, which is actually higher than the national average, which is 13.4.
Councillor De Vink.
The last time we talked about CMES in the context of free school meals. Now we are talking in the context of BGE, which stands for Broad General Education. Help me out. What is CMES exactly?
CMES is the name of what is basically our school's database. So it holds information on pupils' names, staff names, the timetable. We would hold information about free school meals, but it's also a tracking and reporting tool. So if we want to track pupils' attainment over time, that can be held in CMES, and when teachers go to do their final reports, they do that on CMES, and it pulls the tracking information into a final report. So it's almost like a data management system. All of the 32 local authorities in Scotland actually use CMES as their main data management tool. So you'll see the word come up quite a lot in terms of just how we manage any form of data within schools.
What does it stand for?
I'm not sure, actually. Something to do with Scottish Management Information System. I'm not quite sure what the two... Scottish Educational Something Management Information System.
I think the S stands for Strathclyde, because that's where it originally originated. Like it was that's where the system started. And then I think the EMS stands for Educational Management System.
One day somebody will publish an index of Scottish local government acronyms and we'll be all better off for it. It looks as if we're conforming with best practice and the desire of the government, and also noted at the last meeting the improvement in outcomes in Midlothian. Thank you very much indeed. We have also an Audit Scotland report on procurement in councils. And I'd like Ian to introduce this subject.
Thanks, Chair. This was a report, Audit Scotland report, published April 2014. And the report was designed to assess whether councils are efficiently and effectively managing the procurement of goods and services, and looking at what savings and benefits can accrue through good procurement. The report's conclusion is that there's good practice in procurement being demonstrated in local authorities. However, there's always that room for improvement. The report is in three parts. The first part, setting the scene. The second, looking at the benefits of effective procurement. And the third, how councils are performing. The benefits of effective procurement are looking at greater participation in collaborative procurement, looking at community benefits for local economy, etc. I have detailed the position of Midlothian Council in Section 3, and all the recommendations were actually were quite strong in these areas. And if there's any weaknesses at all, it's going to be picked up in the next generation of our procurement strategy, which is going to Council on the 23rd of June. As for Midlothian Council's procurement capability assessment, we achieved a score last November of 65%, which is above the national average of 62%. However, our ultimate aim is to get up to the 75% mark, which is a superior performing council, and that's the aim through the next 3 years of the strategy as well. I would just like the committee to note the Audit Scotland report and the current position of the council in relation to the report, and happy to take any questions.
Councillor Bryant.
I want to thank Ian for all the hard work he's done on this. There's been a power of work done, and we're moving very firmly in the right direction.
Councillor Devink.
Yeah, it all sounds wonderful, but on page 18, could you just explain to me the differences? Because East Lothian, there's such a huge 12% difference. And then there's another one with South Ayrshire, which is 9% difference. Can you just explain to a layman like me how this really relates and what sets the one off against the other?
The procurement capability assessments is assessed over 8 areas, which is looking at the governance around procurement, about the people involved, developing strategies, etc. when we're going out to do procurement. The East Lothian positions, the reason they're so far behind, I think it's more of a resource issue at the moment. Internally, they lost not their head of procurement, but the procurement manager, and I think the team was kind of all over the place for a while, which meant that they weren't meeting some of the basic standards of procurement, and that's why their score is slightly lower. South Ayrshire has probably invested quite a bit of money on bringing in a dedicated development manager to make sure that right across the council that all services are doing, filling out the appropriate paperwork, following the process correctly. What we're trying to do is we manage it within our existing team as well as doing the day-to-day tendering work as well. So that may be why there's that slight disparity between South Ayrshire and being so far ahead of us by 9%, and us being so far ahead of East Lothian.
Councillor Baxter.
Thanks. Yeah, just coming in on that, one thing that jumped out at me when I read the Audit Scotland report on page 33, Exhibit 8, it refers to Renfrewshire Council. It says that additional staff costs were £213,000 in year 1 and £300,000 in year 2. But then it says that the benefits are rising to 5.6 million in 2012 to 13. You know, it just seems like if you put investment in your staff, you get good quality staff and a team dedicated to this, you can actually far, far more than recoup the outlay. Yeah. Am I being oversimplistic in that? Or, could you say that some of the work's being done within the existing team? Well, maybe this is somewhere where it seems a no-brainer, really, to spend some money and get a good quality team in place.
Yeah, well, I do agree with you on that. The actual tendering process is a basic part now of procurement. Where the added value is at the front end of the process and the tail end of the process. So the front end is looking at the market, what's the market telling us, discussing this with businesses, and the tail end is the contract management side of it. Now, most authorities, most of the public sector as a whole, have poor contract management in place. So what we're not doing is eking out innovation, developing contracts during the course of the contracts, while they're there, that there's potential. And it's just down to resource to actually do that. And again, at the start of the process, we are, probably need to spend more time doing a bit of more market research, a wee bit more market analysis before we actually go out to tender. And that, again, is engaging at a really early stage with businesses, because they've got the intelligence out there, they know what's happening within their market, and they can feed that into our strategies before we actually go to market ourselves.
Yeah, as a follow-up to what Councillor Baxter just raised, and going back to that 313 point, total full-time employed, we have 5, South Ayrshire has 7, but we scored 65, they scored 74. What is in actual figures, when you translate that in pounds, what is the difference? Because then you really answer at the same time Councillor Baxter's point.
This is a question of the payback if we invest in more staff in financial terms. It's also a question that affects internal audit, where sometimes when we're sorting out contracts that haven't gone well, there is a financial return.
I don't think, looking at these figures now, I could actually tell you what that payback was. I would have to come back to committee with a further report on that.
I think it is worth noting this council has invested in procurement, and the reason our performance has improved is in fact, 5 years ago we had a single procurement officer, and that wasn't an unusual pattern in local government. So right across local government we have seen a significant investment in procurement on the back of a report produced by John McClelland a number of years ago. And I think right across the sector it's been seen that actually good practice and good quality procurement does reap dividends in terms of savings. And we have made significant savings. I mean, you'll note from the previous financial report that we've undershot on our target this year, but we will continue to make savings if we have that good quality procurement in place.
It wasn't that I was critical. I'm trying to really understand really what the difference is between South Ayrshire and ourselves and how we perform relatively, because it's so difficult to find out really when you read a table like the one you have on 313. I'm trying to really come to grasp with it, and is it worth, like Councillor Baxter suggested, that we might increase our full-time employed group by 1? Could we then achieve a much higher figure yet? And we've done very well. I acknowledge that entirely, but I'm looking to understand how it works.
No, absolutely. If we increased it, by 1 or 2, like I said earlier, the real value in procurement is at the beginning of the process. We're doing a lot of market research, market analysis. Because the size of team I've got at the moment, we're still involved in the day-to-day tendering type of work, which is writing up specifications, going out to tender, doing the evaluation, etc. That kind of administrative type work takes up a lot of time, whereas the real added value is at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process. If I had extra resource that allowed the part in the middle to run quite smoothly, which we're really good at, that would afford us the opportunity to make the real added value at the beginning and the end of the process. And that's where a lot of these scores come from moving from an improved performance council up to a superior performing council, which is hitting the 75% target. That real improvement happens at the beginning of the process and the tail end of the process. And currently, right now, the way our resource working on their job day to day, there's no way that they can do right across that whole spectrum from the beginning to the end of that process. There is, we'll have to prioritise on the work that's in front of us and do it accordingly. And the main part is to get the contracts in place and to make sure that we are compliant.
Councillor Muir.
Yeah. Just, I understand the point that's been made here is that, should we be looking at increasing our resources in that area because of the benefits that come from it, or that appear to come from it as far as this table is concerned, because it does show a general trend. It seems to be the case that in general, the more resource that you're putting into in terms of staff, the better results you're getting. But it's not universally the case, because Moray has almost twice as many FTE procurement staff as us, yet have a lower percentage rating. So it's about what you do rather than the amount of staff. So you're planning, the steps that you're going to take to improve this, the whole area, and then figure out how many staff you need to do it, as opposed to just throwing staff at it.
Point well made. There's a tension always in procurement between giving some sort of special access and priority to local Midlothian businesses versus going much further afield in order to get better value. How does this play out for you in practice, Ian?
Yeah, this is a very difficult area. Just some stats on that. We spend 27% with local businesses. The national average is 21% at the moment, so we're doing quite well in that context. However, am I happy with the 27%? No, I want to increase it. Now, that's one of the main aims of the procurement strategy that's going to be coming to Council on the 23rd, is that I am intending to put together a local procurement policy, which I will do in conjunction with the local businesses as well. And that's really getting more engagement with them on how we do procurement, how we can make it easier for them to tender for work. But what we also need to realise is there's a cut-off point where procurement needs to step back from that process, because then it becomes a competitive process and we're evaluating the submissions. So we can take it so far, so we'll have to work closely with our economic development colleagues and really getting these local businesses capable and ready to tender and to actually carry out any work that comes available. It is getting that fine balance, and we're working hard to do that.
Councillor De Vink.
Well, the support for local businesses has been always an issue that's been very close to my heart. I didn't quite catch those figures. What are the national figures for Scotland?
21% is the national average, and we are at 27% at the moment.
And we had one?
27%.
Really, that figure of 27, could we not improve that? Because really, in the end of the day, these people are our customers, and shouldn't we really look after our customers first?
No, that actually is the aim of the next procurement strategy as well. We're trying to do that. At the end of the day, we can work with them, we can encourage them, we can try and train them. At the end of the day, if they don't want to tender or they're not, their submission is could be potentially too expensive for us to take on. There's only so much that we can actually do with them, but we are constantly working with them. We are constantly giving local businesses feedback of maybe where the reasons why they didn't win previous contracts and what they need to do going forward as well. And it is the aim, and you'll see in the strategy when it comes to council next week, that is the aim over the next 3 years to increase that percentage even more.
A delicate balance. I have to record that some years ago we had an adverse report from Audit Scotland in this area, and it's very encouraging to see the progress that's been made, and look forward to hearing more of procurement in the years to come. Councillor Bryant.
Just to let the committee know that Ian has been running sessions for companies how to do the procurement and the doing of the tenders and so forth. So he's doing his bit.
Thank you very much. We now move on to the risk management position. Yes, item 7.
Thank you, Chair. This report brings forward the Q4 update for Audit Committee for period 1st of January to 31st of March 2015. Section 2 sets out the risk profile at the start of the financial year and at the close of the year, and shows the associated movement across the risk profile. The report provides a summary of the 3 corporate risks rated highest, and a full breakdown of the corporate risks as Appendix 1. And Section 2.7 provides an outline of the critical and high service risks, with the register for these risks shown as Appendix 2. For the Audit Committee's attention, significant work has been undertaken during this quarter to implement the Council's new risk management policy, with work focused on implementing the new 5x5 risk matrix, work in developing a risk management guide to support those managers across the Council who we utilise to identify risks to the organisation, and there's work planned going forward with the Council's Strategic Leadership Forum to enhance the profile of risk management, so that risk management becomes a far greater tool integrated as part of the performance management approach within the Council, and that the information derived from the risk registers can be used to inform decision making.
Thank you very much. Obviously, it's an important matter for the Audit Committee, since we try and align the risks you identify with the work pattern in internal audit where problems emerge. Can I ask you a question about new bars? This is the largest unanticipated loss that we have had, and from the Audit Committee point of view, the explanation has always been that the risk was identified within contract procurement right at the beginning. But is there no aspect of our risk management register which ought to be altered as a result of the new bar's experience, perhaps reflecting in general geological risk, or perhaps reflecting the risk that although we have a valid claim against professionals, we may find for legal or technical reasons we're not able to recoup the money, the point that was raised earlier on?
Gary Fairley provided statement earlier, providing a picture of the financial impact that new buyers had on the organisation. It's not focused here in this report because it's not been identified as a critical or high risk to the organisation, given that the impact of that loss has been absorbed in the short term. The impact of the carbon dioxide from ground conditions as part of the project at New Buyers is something that's been taken into account by our Property Services Department, and it's something that's been planned into any future projects being undertaken by the Council, that due consideration will be given to this as a way of mitigating that as a future risk to the organisation.
So if Audit Scotland were to ask you, where is the new buyers type risk in your risk register structure, what would you say to them?
It's currently resting within the service risk register for property services and FM, because it's a property related matter. If it was focusing as a higher risk to the organisation because it wasn't managed or wasn't being mitigated against, it would focus as a higher rated risk and would be presented within this report to the Audit Committee. It's because it's a managed risk at the moment that it's not focusing as a critical or high risk.
Is there a question of materiality there? And it's surprising to me that something that's costing us north of 8 million is not considered material.
It's a material risk in the context of new buyers, but part of the focus of risk management is to identify future and emerging risks. The reality is we've already realised the loss associated with new buyers, so it's not a new or emerging risk, it's a risk that's been realised by the organisation.
So you're heading to a definition as a one-off?
Yeah.
Councillor De Vink.
Yeah, point 2.2, we have now two items that are high risk and one is critical. Could you just tell us who these three are?
These are the corporate risks, and the corporate risks are identified. The three highest risks identified are balancing budgets and future arrears, corporate change and transition, and welfare reform, with the exact risk scoring against each provided in Appendix 1 against those risks.
We covered the balanced budget issue, the transformation programme earlier on. On welfare reform, we all have, I think, misgivings as to how this is going to play out, but my understanding is that the reforms will be relatively gradual, so we will have lots of early warning signals if there is a need to take corrective action.
There's been some consideration of that particular item recently at the Council's management team, and the reason that risk is still sitting there at the moment is that there's still a great deal of uncertainty about the impact that there will be for the Council over the medium term.
But welfare reform is hardly in our own hands.
Any deficits arising from failure to receive payments will very much be in our hands, I think is the problem. Councillor Bryant?
I was just going to say that some people might have to wait for 5 weeks for their benefit payments, and that's certainly going to be an emergency.
That raises the question of our interaction with the benefit authorities. I'm not sure Midlothian is responsible for those delays.
Well, I think part of the reason why this does still feature on the risk register at the current time is because of the difficulties that the Council has faced over the last months and years in terms of its relationship with the DWP and some of the challenges that has produced for the Council. I think if there was greater clarity about what was going to happen in terms of future welfare reform, then and we were able to manage the risks to our citizens, our residents that may involve, then it would drop out of the critical risks. But at the moment, I think the difficulty that we have had, frankly, in some of the working relationship with the DWP, and I don't think that's any comment against DWP staff working locally, but there have been challenges, and whilst that continues and whilst there is uncertainty, the risk will remain high.
That being so, we'll expect to have feedback to this committee as the situation develops.
Chair, the intention is that the risk report will come forward quarterly, so that members of the audit committee are seeing this 4 times a year.
Graham.
We also have on our plan a review of welfare reform, I can't remember which quarter that's coming in, but it's definitely on our plan.
Chris, can I thank you very much for the progress on the risk register? It's much appreciated. Item 8, as you will know, as of last year, the Chairman is obliged to report formally to the Council on the work of this committee, and the document you will find, pages 43-64, drafted by me and reviewed by the officers, is what we propose to present. Overall, we seem to have made the shift from looking in the rearview mirror at a number of incidents that caused problems to the Council to a position where we're much more forward-looking in terms of anticipating future risks. And that's the tenor of the second report, which I've made to the Council, and the draft of which is set before you. The report will be separately presented by me at a future Council meeting. If you're happy for the draft to pass to the Council, we can move on to the next item. Which we've covered, and then we just have item 10, follow-up review of audit recommendations. Graham, page 79.
Each year we follow up on a number of recommendations made to determine whether they've been fully implemented. A sample of 40 recommendations were reviewed and evidence was obtained to determine whether these had been adequately implemented. A review showed that 36 recommendations had been completed satisfactorily and 4 were partially completed as detailed in Appendix 1 of the report. These were from the audits of council tax liability and billing, high-value electronic payments, accounts receivable, review of risk management. We have therefore raised a further 4 recommendations to address the recommendations that had not been completed, and these are detailed in Appendix 2 of the report. The Audit Committee is invited to review the contents of the audit report and endorse the agreed audit recommendations.
Okay, the supplemental actions are all marked medium. Were there any particularly hard nuts to crack in carrying out the work of the committee?
No, there was no difficulties with this review. The review went really smoothly.
On that note, I recommend we accept the report. Thank you, James and Graham. And that, I think, concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you all for attending.